And we are live, I think. Yes. Hello everyone. I'm I'm Sourabhi Dutta Roy, and I welcome you all to the Stories of Beliefs and Social Customs, curated under TMYS's Review June 2022 in collaboration with the Global South Colloquium, University of Victoria. We are also calling for submissions of stories, poems, and essays related to the project. To know more about our project architecture, kindly visit www.tellmeastory.biz. Um, it's an absolute honor to be in the company of our esteemed panelists this evening, Ms. Coonoor Kripalani and Mr. Philip Wedge, who will shortly share their valuable views and insights with us this evening. Um, Sadly, Professor Son Crosson, who was supposed to join us today as well, is down with COVID and won't be able to participate. We wish him a speedy recovery. Moving on, our topic for the panel is weaving the magic through sports and fiction, literature, and films under the subtheme sports and recreation. Before we move on to the discussion, I would now like to take a brief moment to introduce each of our panelists. Ms. Coonoor Kripalani is a writer and researcher based in Singapore, former Honorary Institute Fellow, Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social, University of Hong Kong. Among her articles on popular Hindi film is Sports and Indian Culture in Popular Film, From Education About Asia. She also writes bilingual books for children. Her forthcoming book on the Tham Luang Cave rescue of the Wild Boars football team will be published in Thai in the spring of this year. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next, we have with us Mr. Philip Wedge, who is a senior lecturer and program associate in English at the University of Francis and the editor of Cottonwood Magazine and Press. He generally teaches courses in British literature, sport literature, freshman honors, and occasionally creative writing. His research interests are primarily in 19th century British literature and in sport literature. He received a John H. Daniels Research Fellowship from the National Sporting Library and Museum in 2013. His publications include a poetry chapbook, Slowly Along the Riverbeds, Coal City 1999, essays on sport literature, including the most recent Sasson's Fox Hunting Man, the sporting character in the memoirs of George Shetton, and poetry and reviews in American Scholar, Athlon, the Journal of Sport Literature, Stone Country, Kansas Quarterly, Amelia, Wind, and High Plains Literary Review, among many others. We welcome you, sir.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning in Kansas, anyway.
Right. We open the forum for discussion now. Anyone can take over from you. So,
Would you like to start?
I, I can if you want. So my understanding is that you're primarily interested in how fiction is translated into sports film, correct?
so,
So I think that one of the courses I teach is literature of sports in the movies, where we look at different genres, right? So nonfiction, fiction, and um, drama. And I think with each genre, you have different challenges. But what we tend to talk about is whether the film uh, maintains the spirit of the original text, right? So with drama, for example. The when drama is taken to film, it's almost exclusively the dialogue that's brought to the film, and they have to sort of find ways to take the play off the stage, so to speak, right? So the staging scenes that are not in a room, or that move the characters away from sort of the stage setting. But in fiction, the problem has to do with, unless you're going to have a 6 hour production of like a BBC production of a text, how do you compress the storyline to fit into a 2 hour frame, at least in the traditional movies? And so there the challenge can be uh, daunting, I think. And sports novels often give an opportunity to accomplish that because are focused. Usually, they're focused on the a particular season, whether a team will go to the championship and win the championship or not, or they're focused on the relationship between a coach and a player. Um, they sometimes they're looking at a whole career, but those tend to be biopics and not based on novels. It seems to me. Some of the best films based on fiction are, in my opinion, are from short story collections. So, for example, one of the best, in my opinion, is um, $1 Million Baby, which is actually a stitching together of two short stories by FX Tool, and then added into that pieces from other sections of his first collection of stories. Um, and I think that film is outstanding in bringing the original text to the screen um, dramatically. Other films, maybe not so much, right? And so an example that I give in classes, my students don't always agree with me. One of the more popular films in baseball literature is The Natural, which is based on a Bernard Malamud novel. But if you've ever read the novel, you know of the ending of the movie where Roy Hobbs hits a dramatic home run to win the playoff game and send the hapless New York Knights into the World Series. Well, in the novel, Roy strikes out. He has every intention to try to win the game at that point, but he's an old man, and one of the themes in that novel is that youth will overcome age, just as Roy Hobbs struck out an aging baseball legend, the Whammer, when he was before he'd even tried out for the major leagues. Before Roy had, Roy Hobbs is going to be struck out by a new phenom for the opposing team, the Pittsburgh Pirates. And that gets completely lost because Hollywood didn't want to have Robert Redford strike out in the final, right? So to me, the challenge with fiction, as I say, has to do with how do you compress, how do you limit the number of characters to make a film effective. And an example to draw from baseball literature again, of a film that does work really well is the movie Field of Dreams, which actually I would say is much better than the novel it's based on, Shoeless Joe. The novel Shoeless Joe has too many characters. There are twin brothers who have different motivations for being there at the end of the novel when they meet their father, right, the catcher. But in the film version, essentially the Ray Kinsella in the film takes on both the dimensions of those twin brothers, and a rationale for his wanting to meet his father again is built in much better in the film because he opposed his father, saying that he couldn't believe in someone who trusted in a liar like Shoeless Joe, a cheater. So that I think that dynamic is really special in the film. It's not as effective in the novel. So it's I'm going on, but that's kind of my take from a basic sense of the challenges with fiction, taking fiction to film. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's really interesting your points, what you said. Um,
Sure.
Miss Miss Kripalani, would you like to add something?
Um, well, the films that I am looking at are primarily Hindi films, popular Hindi films, and some of them are biopics. Um, s- some are actually based on books, but I think not novels as such that I've found in the course of my research. So I will leave the that aspect to Phil. But um, perhaps I can talk about the particularities of Hindi film, which here I would like to make a point of how Hindi films actually break barriers through uh, sports. And chasing gold is a common thread between most of the films that I've looked at. It's what creates the magic and fantasy in the stories of aspiring athletes who work to make these dreams into reality. And to be the best, to be at the top of their game, and to become a champion are generally what most of the films portray. Cricket actually is shown to be the nation's unifier in that all communities come together and the teams are also disparate teams. But there was one particular episode that struck me in a newish film, a very recent film called 83, about the famous cricket match, World Cup cricket match that India won in the UK. And while this match is going on, there are communal riots taking place in a village called Nawabpur. And there's a curfew on, and the police are patrolling. And as they are everybody's sort of hunkered down in their homes, but they want to watch the match. And this Muslim family has a knock on their door from the cops. So they kind of gingerly open the door, and the cops say, "What you doing?" And they say, "Well, we're watching the match." And the cops say, "Well, what's the score?" And then all barriers break down, and the next you see is the cops are sitting cozily with the Muslim family and watching the match together, and after the win they're all hugging each other and laughing together. So it is very heartwarming that this sport does bring people together even at times when they are not happy with each other. um, but some of the themes that I find running through these films are on the traditional side. We see a lot of family support for the athletes, especially in the biopics of athletes. So we have Saina Nehwal, who's a badminton player, Sandeep Singh, a hockey player, MS Dhoni, cricket player, Mary Kom, boxing champion, Sachin, also great cricket player. Um, Gold is again hockey. Dangal is women wrestling, and even Tufan, which is a fictional film, you see the family dynamics at work always. So this aspect is a very strong one that runs through a lot of the Hindi films on sports. And of course, another one that impedes and confronts athletes are referred to in a shorthand that Indian audiences can easily recognize, which are communal issues. And it's quite a sad statement about society, but we see this, and a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment makes an appearance in many of the films. I won't sort of elaborate on this unless we want to discuss it further when we are discussing, but when we enter discussion time. But what I do want to say is that in the film Tufan, it brings to the viewer's attention the problems of intercommunal marriages and the problems Muslims face in India of finding homes, difficult to rent homes, to live in the neighborhoods they would like to. Education is an issue for um, admission to schools, and this discrimination is very pointed, very piercing. And then, of course, the films all focus on athletes, their struggle to become champions, which requires personal discipline, perseverance, focus on training, and all the films we see stress on this. And there was one sort of outlier type of film, which is about a child athlete, a 5-year-old boy who could run marathons. And he was became sort of iconic in his state of Orissa, excuse me. But of course, the child welfare agencies and social activists were outraged by the fact that this child was running the way he ran. He ran 65 kilometers in just 2 minutes over 7 hours from Puri to Bhubaneswar.
Wow.
And although he became extremely uh, sort of the mascot of his state, the central government sort of cracked down. And anyway, it was quite a sad ending. But the boy must be around 2021 now, and he didn't live up to his potential for various reasons. But many issues were brought up about child abuse and ethical values and so on. But anyway, the point is this, the hardship of training, and this young kid was trained in this way. But one of the great aspects of becoming a, s- a champion sports player, it brings with it a lot of social mobility, wealth, and status. So it also it translates into material wealth. Being a celebrity, a lot of the sports people get um, contracts to endorse all sorts of products, and this aspect of their lives, the fame and the celebrity status, is, I think, a great role model for people, youngsters from all parts of the country. And actually, a number of top athletes come from small villages, very conservative areas, and it's a great thing that someone makes good from that village. That person is really, really celebrated as a hero in his or her own state or constituency. And then a lot of them will also win seats in the parliament or in the local legislature. So they join politics and they endorse whichever party has wooed them. So they campaign for political parties and sometimes also win seats themselves. So it actually translates into a lot of respect for them, and they enjoy stipends and they are awarded lands and so on. So it is, in a way, lucrative if you make that top grade. And one of the other things we find in Hindi films generally is patriotism. It's the hallmark of all Hindi films, and particularly films about sports. And so we see actually the rhetoric in the films of how, when athletes are training, it's not just the personal struggle, but to play for the honor of the country, to have the flag flying high. And almost all the films will have a scene when fitting the climax of hoisting the flag, and it sort of induces a collective heart swell of the audience, and there's a great pride in this. So one sees that in most of the films, but in the recent films I also see another current, which is an anti-colonial current, a sentiment. So we find now it's patriotism, but also like beating the home team on home, and beating the say British on their home ground. That becomes a matter of pride, and we see this in Gold, which is talks about the Indian national hockey team, and also in '83, which is about cricket, um, and a cricket game in England, which was actually a very decisive one that put Indian cricket on the map and Indian cricket team on the map. What I would like to focus on today as we approach Women's International Women's Day is also happily the empowerment of women, which appears to be an outcome for women in sports. And we see that in the biopics, particularly, which are Saina, which is Saina Nehwal, the badminton player, Dangal, which is women wrestlers, and another wonderful film called Sand Ki Aankh, which is about um, two grannies, women in their 60s, from a very, very conservative village in UP, who are not even allowed outside their home, manage to become sharpshooting champions in their category while they are actually taking their daughters, their granddaughters to be trained. And here in this film, we see really breaking of boundaries because they are breaking the patriarchal establishment. They challenge it and they actually win, so that by the time the, the grandchildren are ready for it, the men have taken ownership and they are happily telling the press that they are the ones who always have invested in these young girls training and so on, which was a lie. um, but we see this breaking of the mold in these instances. So like in Dangal, where you have female wrestlers, there's um, Mr. Pogat, who himself was a wrestler, an amateur wrestler, and had dreams of being a champion, but had no sons to put this channel this through. Then took his two daughters, and again in a rather conservative village, he cut their hair, put them in shorts, dressed them as boys, and put them in mud pits to wrestle with other boys as part of their training. And so we see here that kind of ambition that for young girls, to be anything that they want to be. And again, actually, Saina Nehwal's mother herself was a badminton player for her state, and her ambition for the daughter was to rise to play at national level. And she put everything behind her, supported her like 110%, to the point where the father even encashes his retirement benefits to pay for her coaching. So these sorts of instances make it make it possible for girls in the villages to understand that they can also be whatever they want if they really set their minds to it. Um, we could discuss this further if we have a chance. But again, Mary Com, these are all real examples. Mary Com, who's a boxer from the state of Manipur, again came from a lot of poverty. She wrestled a man to win the purse in order to buy back her family cow. And then she goes on to be an Olympic winner. So Mary Com also went back to boxing after delivering twin babies. She was the first woman to have ever done this, to return to boxing after having children. So these examples, I think, are quite amazing. And then there's one film which is not um, such a happy film in the sense that it's called Rashmi Rocket, which talks about a fictional but it's an amalgamation of real life athletes. Um, who have been investigated by the IAAF for uh, um, hyperandrogenism, as well as using drugs for performance enhancement, and the indignities and abuse that these women faced. But in fact, the real life uh, runner, these were sprinters. The real life sprinter, who is Dati Chand, herself came out as a lesbian in 2019. She comes from a very conservative family, below the poverty line family, from a weaver community in Orissa. And now she stands as an icon and a beacon of hope for the gay community. So I think these kinds of um, examples in real life are very, very important for a new generation of women and girls as to what they can achieve. So I'll end it there. I think I've spoken at length, and then we can discuss further if we have time.
Okay, ma'am, that was really insightful to know your points. So, would you like to add something to what she mentioned?
Um,
Or
I don't. I was thinking of a film in terms of the imperialist sort of response to imperialism. Isn't there a film? I think it's called Latana.
Lagan.
Lagan, right,
That was the film that was overtly an answer to colonialism.
right.
I find this coming back as a sort of subtext in the other films.
Yes, because I mean that was a lovely film,
Yeah, that's a very brilliant film.
right?
Yeah.
right, okay. Then we move on to the Q and A's now. My first question is actually for ma'am. Um, as you mentioned already, that India's fascination with sports biopics is has always been apparent. How does such pop culture references build out through time that kind of affects the audience's perceptions, and does these narratives make the audience's perceptions change, and how does this affect the cultures and traditions that a country represents, perhaps?
So personally, I feel that the biopics are have an agenda. Let's put it that way. And so they do take liberties with, say, maybe chronology, or they bend certain facts. But sometimes one almost gets the impression that they are out there to explain certain glitches, um, that may have occurred in that person's life. So, for instance, I felt in the Sachin Tendulkar film biopic that he wanted to explain his captaincy, and the issues that had arisen at the time. So that is something I also like. MS Dhoni, the untold story, like why did he not make it to the Calcutta match that was so imperative for his career, and so on. And I think that sports fans who follow these icons when they are playing, they follow them so and their lives so closely, will be interested to hear these excuses, or hear the other side of the story, however you interpret it. But I feel that they do seem to want to make this point. But in the Sina film, I found it a quite interesting explanation. When she's at this low point in her career, her coach has told her he's had enough of her, doesn't want to train her. She had to look for another coach, and she was feeling very down. Another academy actually introduced her to fan clubs of young children, girls, like 8, 9, 10-year-old fan clubs. And they all were kind of wanting to dress like her, be like her, play like her. And she found that she was such an inspiration to them, but in return, that discovery inspires her to go back to play. um, I I can't vouch for the truth of it, but this is in the biopic, and I found it very interesting because we don't often think of fan clubs as a two-way street, but actually the celebrity doesn't want to disappoint the fans, so they actually work in a way for them once like she discovers that that is what they wanted.
Uh, do you know
So
do you know the film The Pride of the Yankees? The 1930s film about Lou Gehrig.
yeah,
It pivots on that notion as well. The young boy that Gehrig once hit a home run for, and now that Gehrig is suffering from ALS and about to retire, the boy returns, which is a fictionalized event, but was made a pivotal moment in the film because there's a fan reconnecting with the player, right? I think that is a
yeah,
standard trope that whether in fiction or
okay.
bio, right?
Right, right, right.
Okay.
And yeah, sorry.
Yes, no, ma'am, were you continuing something?
No, no, we can carry on.
Okay.
You have another question.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no.
I was just going to add in.
I like that. It's a good addition. Yeah.
Um, so to carry on, historic sports events have traveled across time, which of course later has been adopted on screen and also on the pages. Do you agree that popular culture representation of sports and such events help put additional spotlight on a particular sports? And is this perhaps what creates the magic of sports literature and films?
Is that a question for me? I'm,
Is it is a question
Uh,
for Phil
yes,
or
sir.
for me?
Yes, sir.
I'm, um, yeah, can you say it again?
So
Sorry.
no, sir, it's fine. Historic sports events have, of course, traveled across time, which has been adopted on screen and also on pages. So, do you agree that the popular culture representation of such events has put uh, additional spotlight to a particular sports which was not that famous earlier? And is this perhaps what creates the magic of sports literature and films?
Um, I think historical, historical events are central to certain types of film. Um, for example, I don't want to always be talking about baseball, but baseball literature is filled with connections to the famous 1919 World Series, where a group of players for the White Sox agreed to basically throw the games to lose the championship for money. And of course, there are there's a book which was then created into a film, nonfiction book called Eight Men Out, that focuses on that. But you also have Shoeless Joe, which becomes Field of Dreams, and even F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby references this particular scandal. And so historical moments like that certainly reverberate in many films, I think. Um, Whether they spotlight the sport in a positive way is a different question, right? Um, the to spin off the idea of fan influence, for example, there's a famous newspaper account of a young boy going up to Shoeless Joe Jackson uh, during the trial, and saying "Say it ain't so, Joe," and Shoeless Joe is not able to deny what that he was involved in the scandal, and that has sort of played out with other films. Whether that event actually happened is a big question, but it becomes part of the mythos of that particular scandal. Um, the Whether it makes baseball or any other sport more popular, I guess it depends on the historical event, right? I mean, um, the the breaking of the color barrier by Jackie Robinson, the quote unquote breaking the color barrier. There were African American players playing in the 19th century in Major League Baseball, but uh, when Robinson broke in, that has been a sort of a moment that's been celebrated in many films and lots of sports fiction, right? And so certainly those or Jesse Owens' performance in the 1936 World Olympics, right in Germany. These are moments that certainly become pivotal sports moments historically. Another film uh, based on an historical event would be that comes to mind for me would be Billy Mills winning the 10,000 meters in the Tokyo Olympics, which has had several films based on that moment, right? A Native American winning a distance race when nobody thought that he had a chance, right? Um, there you get the sort of the combination of a historical moment and the trope of the success against all odds kind of event. I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly, but does does that
Yes, sir.
approach what you were looking for? Okay.
Yes. Um, Ma'am, you also mentioned earlier that Bollywood has often treated sports films with some kind of nationalism and patriotic fervor. Of course, recent films like you mentioned Rashmi Rocket, which has kind of taken a more urgent issue, perhaps. Do you think, why don't we, what is your take on the matter that why don't we showcase urgent issues, more urgent issues than nationalism? Why is it always a little too stereotypical of patriotism and just the national context?
Well, I think that I mean, I'm hazarding a guess. I don't really know why they haven't done other things, but I think that in a sense that the patriotism and the nationalism is a byproduct of whatever else is being shown in the film. They kind of just weave it through. Even if it's a family drama, somehow it becomes about Indianness and culture and so on. So I think that that is what the audience expects. It's perhaps also to get the right rating so your film sells, perhaps to get on the right side of the censor board. It's just part of the culture of filmmaking, perhaps I would say. But I think that the films have taken up other issues. As I mentioned earlier, this communal aspect comes out quite a lot. You know, the communal tensions um, always seem to be there. Um, Even if it's not just Hindu and Muslim, it has to do with regional uh, differences. So, trying to understand or make people understand perhaps that there are other states in the Northeast or different states in the South that speak different languages, and Telugu is distinct from Tamil and so on. That I think maybe is important. You know. Um, and also a kind of triumphalism in when you have an athlete come from what they would consider like a backward state, then there's a kind of triumphalism in the fact that that state has produced a great champion at national level, Olympic gold winner, or whatever, you know, they are good at. So I think that that is quite an important aspect also of films. Um, and then actually there are other issues in the subtext. For instance, Saina Nehwal, who seems to have a very straight line projection of her career. She's just going up and up and up. Has a little blip where she's kind of flirting with a young man while they are training, and she's the one who gets told off, to focus and concentrate. Now, she may have been told off because she was the superior player and they had hopes in her, but she interprets it as, why do they always do this to women? No one said anything to Sachin when he married at the age of 22. So she makes the difference that, okay, for a guy it's okay, but because I'm a girl, they are asking me to focus and not have a romance on the side. So there is this kind of, again, going back to it, the women's issues, like what is okay to tell women that is not okay to tell men. And so I think that there is this. And also I'm trying to understand this anti-colonialism that should have been forgotten by now. And perhaps it is actually just to forge that national identity again. But, this is another element that is also coming into the films that we are seeing. So I think it is, in a way, to build a kind of cohesiveness and show that there are rifts, but always the resolution of this divisiveness in a team is always resolved through telling players that actually your strength is in the diversity of your skills and everything else is irrelevant. And in all the films they show this is how they bring the teams together, even though there's class and region and religion and all this, to bring them to play as teams. This is the thing they have to instill in them. So I think that the films actually take up other issues in a kind of subtext way, subliminal way, I should say, so that when perhaps it is being watched generally, people don't focus on the little things, but somewhere inside they absorb it, I think.
Right. So when it comes to the age-old classics, classic literature, new and ever-evolving approaches of reading and studying the old classics have always interested and inspired new scholars. For example, the feminist approach and the LGBTQ and etc. Um, Given the context of sports, have sports ever made an impact on classics? And if at all, can classics be read with the special approach of sports and its narratives?
Okay, that's a question for me, right?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so one of the areas of my research has been with Jane Austen and looking at um, her texts from the lens of sport. And I think that with Austen, at least, that adding that perspective is helpful because so much of Austen's scholarship is focused on how Austen understands the woman's world of her time period well, and the point of view is always from essentially from a women's point of view. We don't see scenes where only men are involved, right? But I argue that Austen understood the world of men just as well as she understood the world of women, and you can see that through the way she understands sport in the land in terms of landed gentry, the gentleman going out to shoot birds, gentlemen going out fox hunting, and in fact, almost all her novels are plotted, with the exception of Emma, on the seasons of sport. So for example, Pride and Prejudice, what what most people are most familiar with. Um, when Bingley comes to rent Netherfield, he comes in Michaelmas, so he comes in September. At that point, the shooting season uh, has already begun for partridges and is about to begin for pheasant. And even though shooting's not mentioned in the opening sections of the novel, that first visit, when he returns and of course proposes to Jane, and Darcy proposes to Elizabeth, it is shooting season again. It's the same time period. That is, the season has evolved in the course of the year, and now he has a reason to come back to Netherfield, not just to propose to Jane, but so that he can shoot birds on the property he's rented, which gives him the right to shoot. And of course, you have this great line from Mrs. Bennet, right? Saying, once you've killed all the birds on your estate, come here and my husband will save all the best coveys for you. And coveys is the absolute perfect word. The covey is how you refer to a group of partridges, but not pheasant, right? And it's one of many examples, I think, in her novels that shows that Austen, who had brothers who shot and nephews and so on, right, that she understands the world of men well. And even though we don't get to see it, right, she knows what's going on behind the scenes, and she's able to bring that to the text, right? And so I think sometimes we do a disservice to Austen if we only talk about how she understands what life was like for women, right? I'm not sure it's as dramatic with some other classic writers, but certainly Dickens, Thomas Hardy, um, many writers who did not write novels that we would think of as sports novels, right? The sport becomes pivotal at certain points in their texts, and so that's really interesting to go back and look at, and that's certainly been the focus of my research as a scholar.
So to carry on with what you just mentioned, when it comes to sports films, as you mentioned earlier, there seems to be no shortage of films with sports as a theme, but literature often takes a back seat, with novelists not shying away from the same suit. Why do you think that little attention is paid to the relationship between literature and sports, and why is film more explored with sports than literature, fiction literature perhaps?
Um, well, I'm not sure if I think there's a lot of good fiction about that sport literature, and the question I would put is, why aren't more films being made out of these books, right? And in particular, there are a number of women novelists who've made sport central to one of their novels at least. Anne Lamott wrote a novel about junior tennis players called Crooked Little Heart. It seems to me it's very cinematic. It could be made into a film, and maybe somebody bought the rights and they haven't ever developed it. Right? I mean, that can happen with fiction. A Canadian author named Angie Abdu wrote a novel called The Bone Cage, about an Olympic swimmer, a woman swimmer trying to make it the Olympic team in Canada for the Sydney Olympics in 2000, and a wrestler who is also trying to become an Olympian, and how their relationship develops over the run up to the Olympics. There are novels about swimming the English Channel. There are novels about running in the first Olympics that women were allowed to run in 1928. And yet they haven't been made into films yet, right? So I think particularly women writers right now, sport has become part of sort of their interest, and many of them are coming from having been athletes themselves, and now and become fiction writers, right? It becomes part of their focus in their literature. But the films haven't caught up to that yet. I would say it seems like there's a lot of material out there that could be turned into film that hasn't been yet, and not so much as in Indian films that Coonoor's talking about. There are biopics and movies based um, on books, nonfiction books, right? Seem to be the thing, right? So you've got Friday Night Lights, based on a book that was written about a 1988 football season. You've got Moneyball, based on a team pulling together in the traditional ways, using sort of unexpected means to have a success in baseball. You got The Blind Side, about again, a football story based on a real life individual that's nonfiction. The Moneyball and Blind Side, of course, are both by the same author, Michael Lewis, right? And so Hollywood seems to be focusing more on these texts, and less on the much more diverse literature that's out there. And so it's time for, I don't know, independent filmmakers to step in, right? Um, there's even a there's there that has happened. I mean, there's a there was a collection of poetry, book length poetry, about a goalkeeper in Canada who was famous, Tony Sawchuk, um, and that book was then turned into a movie, which was released on Netflix, but hasn't gotten a lot of play, right? And so there are some literature texts that are being brought into film, but not enough, in my opinion, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Right. My next question is for ma'am. Ma'am, do you feel that film scripts unnecessarily dramatize certain key events in sports history, with all the underdogs and the concept of underdogs? And how do such storylines affect the audience's realistic approach to sports? And how should the filmmakers balance the real and the fictional perfectly?
Well, I think actually dramatization in film may perhaps not be unnecessary. I think it perhaps adds a lot to the film. It you know there is license taken with certain facts and certain timings, chronology, but it gets more eyeballs. It makes it more interesting. So I think that mix of chronological amnesia and supercharging an event perhaps makes for a better film, or gets more viewers. And maybe, yes, it makes kind of a fictional reality for certain viewers. But just coming back to the films, the women athlete films, I think that actually that dramatization, for instance, in Sant Ki Aankh, where these women are dressed as villagers. I mean, all the other sports people, when they play sports, dress as sports women. These ladies don't. They are absolutely in their village garb as they move around during the day, and so they are at the shooting range and in the tournament, and they are mocked for it. But then, of course, once they start shooting, they hit a bullseye every time. There is nothing else that they shoot. They only shoot bullseyes. It's amazing. And the reason that they are able to be such sharp shooters is because the men do nothing. So when there's this drama, and it is very dramatized, discover that these women have been going behind their backs and traveling outside the village, and mingling with other people, and they are horrified, and they come down really hard on the women. And so it becomes such a big thing in their family. It's taken to the village panchayat. And here the women actually have their say. They say, what do these men contribute to our lives? They just make us pregnant every year. They send us to the fields to produce. They do no work in the fields. So we are doing the sowing and the reaping, the harvesting and production is all ours. We work in the brick kiln after we finish work in the fields, and we look after the house, the laundry, the cooking, and so on. And the men sit around smoking their hookah and laying down the law for the women and the children. And they just have an outright, okay, so you decide, they say, because in the world you are nothing. You are the husbands of Chandro and what was the Prakashi. Here we may be your wives and you bully us, but outside, that is your identity. You are nobody. And I found that, of course, it's very dramatic, but it was very compelling because the men actually don't give up so easily, but a series of events is such that they have to accept a fait accompli. And when their granddaughters finally go out, because the panchayat says these girls will train and they will make our village proud, is that turning point where you have an acceptance of, okay, women from this village can go out and do other things if they, well, obviously, if they do the right thing. So it really is breaking a mold, it's breaking a barrier, it's really crossing the line. And it's a huge line in that community. So I think a dramatization of this sort of thing is a very entertaining film, and it's very entertaining also how the women speak because they really plain speak. But the reason that they are such sharpshooters is because they do all this physical work. They're just like fit as any athlete. They are lifting bricks, they're out in the field, they're digging, they're plowing, they're doing everything. And so when the girl takes the rifle and the trainer says, hit a bullseye, this old grandma says, so what's the big deal about doing that? He says, you can do that. She says, sure, I can. And she does. And they shoot bullseyes, these two women, every single time. It's fantastic. And it's real. It's not fictionalized. I mean, it may you think that it would be a great fiction, but these women really did it. One of them is still alive. So I think that that kind of dramatization perhaps is not needless. I think I really appreciate um, this aspect of the film that really brings home the fact that really there are these boundaries that can be smashed and barriers that can be smashed. These are not just glass ceilings, these are shackles and chains, and these can be smashed. So actually, I'm for it.
Right. With that, we come to an end for today. It was an absolute delight to get to know such exciting and insightful, thought provoking insights actually for the representation of sports in popular media, be it literature, be it films. Um, Especially what ma'am said about Bollywood and the mention of Jane Austen from Suicide really excited me because I take personal interest on Austen. Um, Anyways, I'm sure our viewers who watch the live and who would be watching it on our Facebook page would equally love it. Thank you once again to ma'am, Ms. Kripalani and Mr. Wedge for taking out time from their busy schedules to speak for TMYS. And just a reminder, we are calling for submissions of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.